After a week, we had a break week last week. This is a lucky number, I think. Number 10 is always a good lucky number, and that's the meeting we are conducting today. So that was pursuant to the motion on October 27th, 2020. We're proceeding with two briefings. The first, which will deal with Southern Cameroon, and the second, which will deal with Ethiopia. Members, you're aware, just as we get into the questioning of the witnesses, when it gets down to about 30 seconds or so left of your time, I'll just kind of flash the card, just so you're aware that you have about 30 seconds left and to conclude. For those that have not used this platform, maybe our witnesses, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a globe, and on that globe, you're able to choose interpretation, so in English or French. So on that note, I am going to welcome our witnesses. And so welcome from the USC Gould School of Law International Human Rights Clinic. We have Hannah Gary, the director there. From the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, the Senior Associate and Regional Director for Central and West Africa Programs, Christopher Formonio. And from the Oasis Network for Community Transformation, Chair of Cameroon Working Group, we've got Effie Tembon. He's the Executive Director. We are going to start. So witnesses, you'll have 5 minutes to provide your opening remarks, and then it will go to members for questions. We'll start with Ms. Hannah Gary, and you've got 5 minutes, Ms. Gary.
Thank you so much, and good evening, honorable members of the subcommittee. It really is a privilege to brief you all on the current situation in Cameroon, and I really appreciate this opportunity. As was mentioned, I'm clinical director of law and founding director of the USC Gould School of Law's International Human Rights Clinic, and engage students in legal representation and advocacy for upholding fundamental human rights for all. In addition, I do teach in the areas of international criminal law and transitional justice. I've been a legal officer and deputy chef de cabinet at the Yugoslav and Rwandan tribunals, visiting professor at the International Criminal Court, Amici Counsel in the Afghanistan hearing at the ICC, and a senior legal advisor to the Cambodia Tribunal. So relevant for this briefing, since the end of 2017, the USC Clinic has been calling attention to the unfolding crisis in the Anglophone regions of Cameroon, making detailed factual and legal submissions documenting serious violations of international human rights law to officials at international and regional bodies. In addition, the clinic has been briefing the US Congress and Departments of State and Treasury on the crisis. Currently, the clinic is preparing a detailed report documenting ongoing abuses against the civilian Anglophone population, including through in-depth interviews with dozens of refugees, with a view to assist any future investigations of perpetrators. So what is the current situation in Cameroon? In the Northwest and Southwest regions, it is nothing short of an atrocity situation, consisting of widespread and systematic crimes against humanity, against the civilian population, and serious violations of international humanitarian law, or the laws of war, against civilians as protected persons, amounting to war crimes. Some non-governmental organizations are now warning of an impending genocide. The current armed crisis began in 2016 when security forces cracked down with violent use of force against widespread peaceful protests organized by Anglophone lawyers and teachers against discriminatory policies in the legal system and schools. Now, after 4 years of escalating civil unrest between government forces and non-state armed groups, Cameroon faces a humanitarian catastrophe exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. Over 200 villages have been burnt to the ground. There have been widespread killings, currently estimated on the ground around 5,000 to 6,000, forced disappearances, arbitrary detention, torture, rape, and other acts of sexual violence, and more than 700,000 civilians forcibly displaced from their homes, with over 60,000 across the border in Nigeria and tens of thousands elsewhere. It is estimated that 81% of children in the Anglophone region, over 800,000, have been unable to attend school since 2017. And for the past 2 years, Cameroon has topped the list of most neglected crises as published by the Norwegian Refugee Council, with around 3 million in need of humanitarian assistance. So what must be done? First, the violence must stop. For too long, over 4 years now, the international community has stood by or taken insufficient action while an atrocity situation has unfolded before our eyes. It is imperative that we do so to prevent an escalation to genocide. Second, there must be accountability for the abuses already perpetrated. We in the clinic respectfully request the Canadian government to work together with the African Union states and relevant Western governments, such as the United States, the UK, and EU member states, particularly France, to address the situation in Cameroon as follows. First, issue strong resolutions such as the recent US Senate Resolution 684 of 1st January 2021, condemning the ongoing serious human rights abuses and calling for targeted global Magnitsky sanctions against perpetrators on both sides of the conflict to signal that the international community is watching. Second, implement targeted Magnitsky sanctions in coordination with other governments in order to encourage a ceasefire and discussions towards a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Third, consider acting as a neutral third-party mediator, perhaps as part of a coalition of states, to facilitate inclusive dialogue between the parties for ending the conflict. Fourth, support efforts towards establishing a fact-finding commission of inquiry through the UN or the AU to investigate the atrocities. And finally, work to end impunity for atrocity crimes that have been perpetrated thus far through judicial proceedings, whether through support for a case against Cameroon before the International Court of Justice or investigation of perpetrators by national, regional, or international criminal jurisdictions, such as the ICC. In conclusion, we urge Canada to play a leading role in intervening in the Cameroon situation as a member of the Commonwealth that has provided humanitarian and security aid to the country. Achieving peace and justice in Cameroon is critical, not only because of the numerous victims of atrocity crimes, but also for promoting regional stability, stopping refugee flows, and facilitating effective counterterrorism efforts. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gary. And now we'll move to Mr. Formanyo.
Honorable Chairman and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the opportunity that's been given to me to address you today with regards to the armed conflict in Cameroon. Monsieur le Président et honorable député.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you regarding the ongoing conflict in Cameroon and the possible contribution Canada could make towards a negotiated end of the conflict and an exhaustive settlement of the real and legitimate grievances of the Anglophone people. I will give my presentation in English, but I will gladly answer questions in either French or English, depending on the language it's asked in.
By Professor Gary, and update with regards to the number of children who are now out of school, to state that the number as of today is gone up from 800,000 kids to 1.1 million kids. Because she spoke about the status report, I'll go straight to the causes. The root causes of this crisis can be summarized in the botched reunification on October 1, 1961, of the former British Southern Cameroon with the Republic of Cameroon to form the Federal Republic of Cameroon. Over the years, this has been aggravated, in fact, during the past 60 years, by a bad faith effort by the Francophone-led central government to assimilate the Anglophone minority into the Francophone majority. Since October 1, 1960, Cameroon has known only two presidents, both Francophones and strong proponents of a highly centralized Jacobin system of government. Hence, the frustrations of Anglophones and the disaffection has grown for decades, driven in large part by government actions, including one, the May 1972 abolition of the Federal Republic of Cameroon and adoption of the United Republic of Cameroon. Two, the February 1984 reversion of the country's name from the United Republic of Cameroon to the Republic of Cameroon which coincides with the territory that obtained independence from France on January 1, 1960. 3, the October 1992 first competitive presidential election in Cameroon's history, with a contested outcome in which an Anglophone was declared the runner-up, whereas he and many of his supporters felt that he had won the race. And the April 2008 constitutional amendment, which undid presidential term limits and allowed the current president, Paul Biya, to serve as president for life. What are my major concerns today? I've got 3. Currently, I would like to draw the committee's attention to 3 main concerns. 1, the government's inclination to use the military and brute force to resolve otherwise genuine, legitimate political grievances of Anglophones. 2, the continuous poisoning of minds and furtherance of disaffection and polarization because of the killings and atrocities currently being perpetrated in former British Southern Cameroon. And 3, the lukewarm attitude of the international community beyond a few declarations and now Resolution 684 of the United States Senate adopted on January 1, 2021. Recommendation. Honorable Chairman, members of the committee, Canada is in a unique position to contribute to an end to the armed conflict and the search for a negotiated solution that addresses the root causes. Canada has a proud history of managing cultural diversity and heritage and peacemaking. Canada is the only country that, like Cameroon, sits on both the Commonwealth of Nations and the Francophonie. It has mutually respectful relationships across Africa and with European countries that it could leverage and galvanize to help end the killings and atrocities being committed today in Cameroon. I therefore submit the following recommendations for your consideration. 1, call for an immediate ceasefire and cessation of hostilities and a public commitment by the government of Cameroon and non-state actors to negotiations with third-party facilitation. 2, use your good offices to engage France so she can leverage her privileged position with the government of Cameroon to get the government to commit to peace negotiations to bring an end to the conflict and address its root causes. 3, adopt targeted sanctions against the perpetrators of mass killings, torture, and other atrocities in the ongoing conflict. And 4, use Canada's position on multilateral organizations such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the African Development Bank, and even NATO to ensure that resources granted to Cameroon for development purposes are not diverted to execute a war against its people whose only crime is to be a minority with a distinct history and genuine political grievances.
Thank you, Mr.
For your
Foreman.
time and attention.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move to Mr. Tembon for 5 minutes, sir, please. Thank you. You're on mute, if you could unmute.
Okay, good. Yeah, honorable members of parliament, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be able to share in this hearing and to be able to share about what's going on in Southern Cameroon. A civil protest movement in the Southern Cameroon against systemic oppression and what most Southern Cameroonians consider recolonization transformed into a major crisis in 2016. Rather than engaging in peaceful dialogue, the Cameroon government cut the internet, used disproportionate force and helicopter gunships.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Tembon. If you could put your microphone, your headset back on, just for the interpreter so they can hear better, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So rather than use engage in peaceful dialogue, the Cameroon government cut the internet and used disproportionate force and helicopter gunships against peaceful protesters, resulting in several deaths. And as the protests continued, the killing also continued. And Southern Cameroonians groups formed armed groups and started to fight back. And the Cameroon president declared war. and it's transformed into a lot of chaos, into mass killing, and a lot of crime that is going on. So it's resulted in thousands of deaths, as my colleagues have already said, hundreds of thousands of people who are internally displaced, about 100,000 refugees in neighboring countries, and children who have not gone to school for about the last 4 years. When we look at this conflict, some analysts have described it as Rwanda in slow motion due to the mass killing, extrajudicial and summary executions, and rampant human rights abuses. And there is overwhelming evidence of ongoing systemic atrocities carried out on the population of the southern Cameroons. These atrocities amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The responsibility to protect was coined in the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty report that was set up by the Canadian government in December of 2001. The work of the committee was to make sure that the international community never again fails to stop genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, Western governments so far have put economic values above human rights in their dealings with the Biya government in Cameroon and are playing bystander to genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. By doing nothing, these countries are fully supporting these atrocities. Canada can be an exception. There is an urgency for the international community to live up to its responsibility to protect, help facilitate negotiations to resolve the root causes of the conflict, carry out an international investigation, and refer perpetrators of these atrocities to the International Criminal Court. We request this committee and the Canadian government to invoke the doctrine of the responsibility to protect in the Southern Cameroons, to call for international mediation to resolve the root causes of the conflict and self-determination for Southern Cameroons, ask the Commonwealth to expel Cameroon from the body and call for international sanctions against Cameroon's leaders and all those who are carrying out atrocities in Southern Cameroons, and refer the case to the International Criminal Court to hold perpetrators of these crimes accountable. Thank you very much.
Mr. Tembon, thank you very much, and to all our witnesses for your opening statements. I am going to just reiterate with the members, in about 25 minutes or so, we will have an e-vote. As soon as we hear, we'll suspend. We'll all vote as quickly as we possibly can, and I ask that you just come right back onto the platform, so that I don't even know if we have to go off the platform, Clerk, right? We just stay on, vote, and then as soon as we're all done, then we can restart the meeting. So it will lead into some of our time. I'll add that onto the end. We're going to start our questioning with Ms. Anita Vandenbeld from the Liberals for 7 minutes. Anita.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here this evening on what is a very, very significant issue, but one that we don't hear much in the media. And I'm particularly interested in what you were saying about Canada's unique position in terms of multilateral partners and being able to lead, particularly on impunity, because we know that when I hear the words genocide, when I hear, I know one of the witnesses said that, we're in a position now where we could prevent a genocide. One of the keys to that is rule of law and impunity. So I would like to hear from the witnesses about what it is specifically that Canada could do, but also what we could do in partnership with other multilateral partners to ensure that we end impunity. You could go in the same order that you spoke. That would be good.
And just please unmute. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Very important question. So in my mind, I think that Canada as a member state of the International Criminal Court is in a particularly good position to potentially support any efforts made by the prosecutor's office towards investigation potentially. Now, as you may know, Cameroon is not a member state of the International Criminal Court. However, because there are so many refugees fleeing across the border into Nigeria, there could be a jurisdictional nexus there on the basis of territory. And already the prosecutor is investigating in Nigeria with regard to other circumstances and alleged crimes. But there is potentially the possibility for the prosecutor to look into things proprio motu. There also may be the possibility for Canada to perhaps refer the situation to the International Criminal Court as a states party. Another thing, in terms of your question with regard to multilateral efforts, I would strongly encourage Canada. I know you're not on the Security Council at the moment, but to use your influence to negotiate with those sitting on the Security Council to call for an open official discussion. There was an ARIA in 2019, but something more needs to be done and statements need to be made by the Security Council to notice the situation, address it, and to call it what it is. Thank you.
If I may add in response to Honorable Anita's question, one of the challenges with the conflict in Cameroon is that we don't have access to the most updated information. That once in a while there's a massive atrocity like the massacre in Gabu or the massacre of school children in Kumba, and everyone cries out. But there's lives being lost on a daily basis. One of the things that Canada can do is to lead the calls for an official international fact-finding mission that will be able to go into the conflict areas and collect the data that's required to let the world know how many lives have been lost, how many people are in the bushes, how many people have been affected, how many people are in detention, so that we can have a specific data to work with. Without such a high level fact-finding mission, that's right now a lot of propaganda on social media. No one owns up to atrocities that are committed unless there's proof that that party has been identified with a specific act of massacre or a specific violation of human rights. So a fact-finding mission would be a good place to start. And from there, we would be able to identify the perpetrators and work to bring them to justice. Because of the very polarized nature of this conflict, it's incredibly difficult. It's going to be incredibly difficult for justice to be meted by parties that are themselves parties to the conflict. And that's why there's a very strong emphasis in finding ways to bring the perpetrators of the massacres before international jurisdiction and to help work with other countries to make that possible. I think even though Cameroon is a signatory but hasn't ratified the Rome Convention, there are other member states that are being impacted by this conflict, whose actions could also facilitate an investigation by the ICC and jurisdiction being taken up by that institution that would help us deal with the issues of impunity. It's also important to see sanctions as one way of curbing impunity, because once targeted sanctions are meted out against the perpetrators, then it sends a very strong signal that the world is watching and that impunity will no longer be accepted. Thank you.
Yeah, I will also add to what my colleagues have said. Canada can work alongside other countries. There's been some movement within the US with the Senate resolution. There is some initiative also going on in Germany. And so if Canada can join these efforts, that will really help, because Cameroon has decided to just not care about resolutions, but I think there's a need for some more pressure to happen to bring the Cameroon leaders around a negotiation table where they can discuss and handle and settle the root causes of the conflict, but also a ceasefire. If you can work together alongside other countries to bring a ceasefire, that will help.
Thank you. I did want to ask about the school children and the impact on gender and on
About 20
girls,
seconds.
but I don't think any of you have
Yeah.
a chance to answer. So if in the future rounds you have a chance, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we're moving to the Conservatives with Mr. Kenny Chu for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming to the subcommittee for to update us on the situation of Cameroon. I got a question that I would like to hear from each of you, starting from Mr. Tambone in reverse, Mr. Pham, and then Ms. Gary. COVID-19 has pretty much stopped the world in many areas. I'd like to hear from you what the situations of Cameroon is vis-a-vis with the COVID-19 impact, whether it stopped some of the conflicts or it has actually created even worse situations for the civilians there.
Yeah, I think COVID has created even a very difficult situation for the people because the government takes advantage of that to clamp down and take away the rights of the people. Most of the people in those regions are living in the bushes, in those villages where houses have been destroyed. They don't have access to information, even information about COVID, how to prevent that, because they're living in bushes, in the forest. And so it makes it a bit difficult for the people in those communities. Some are living in very crowded areas. And so when you talk about social distancing, you don't have that going on in those, especially in the southern Cameroon.
Honorable members, you may be aware of the fact that in 2020, the UN Secretary General issued a statement calling for a global ceasefire because of COVID-19, and that the UN Security Council passed Resolution 2532, actually asking countries and warring factions around the globe to cease to embrace the ceasefire because of COVID-19. Obviously, that resolution didn't have any meaning in Cameroon, and some of the worst massacres that we saw occurred in 2020, right in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The concern now, the urgency now, is that as Africa braces itself for the second wave of COVID-19, if nothing is done to bring about a ceasefire right now, that the crisis is only going to be aggravated by the exposure that ordinary citizens have to the COVID-19 pandemic, with very little or no access to medical facilities, especially in the conflict areas. Thank you.
Ms. Gary?
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot to add to my colleagues, other than to note that with the arbitrary detentions and other abuses, they have been exacerbated because of the pandemic and COVID. And obviously, as Mr. Tambone stated, with the forced displacement and folks living in the bush and in very close quarters, it has made circumstances very difficult. And then I would also note that, you know, with regard to, we are seeing with regard to trials and fair trials, that the COVID pandemic has been used as pretext to deny folks due process.
Thank you. Thank you. You have mentioned, all of you have mentioned earlier that the government has committed atrocities and taken advantage of COVID, for example, to further instigate worse massacre, et cetera, But according to the information provided to us, the atrocities actually were committed by on the both sides, also the separatists as well. Can you tell me what you have suggested, you know, exerting international pressure, applying Magnitsky sanction and all that can only be applicable mostly to regime, to the government itself. So is there any suggestion that you have that would Canada can do to actually force both sides, especially the separatist side, from taking up arms and from hurting the civilian populations? Ms. Gary, let's reverse the order then.
So our position in the clinic is that with regard to alleged atrocities on the ground, it is important to investigate and look at both sides. And indeed there are alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity with regard to armed non-state actors, separatist groups as well. In terms of putting pressure, I think that the Magnitsky sanctions are one way to go about this, in addition to looking at alleged government perpetrators. Magnitsky sanctions can be imposed not just on government, but also non-state actors.
Thank you. Mr. Fomian?
I would say, I would just add to that, I think everyone who calls for thorough investigations, and especially an international fact-finding mission, is open to having atrocities identified with whichever party is culpable or responsible. There's always the danger to try to rationalize or relativize. And while both sides have committed atrocities, there's a pattern of atrocities that are committed by uniformed officers and atrocities that are committed by the non-state actors who, for the most part, are very involved in crimes such as kidnappings for ransom and sometimes targeting of individuals whom they see as supporters of the state. There's a lot of work to be done, but for that work to be done, a high-level fact-finding mission would help operate in a very non-partisan way and bring to the fore all of those that are guilty of those atrocities.
Thank you, Mr. Temple.
Yes, while both sides, there have been atrocities committed by armed groups, some horrible atrocities, the government has committed the worst kind of atrocities you can imagine. From the facts we have gathered, it's horrible what they have done. And I support the idea of to get a fact-finding mission on the ground that will help us see what's going on in the southern Cameroon. It's difficult to put an equivalence between both sides because the government is armed, supported by the international community. Armed groups are hiding in their communities, trying to defend themselves. And then through defending themselves, they commit some really horrible crimes too. But I would suggest that a fact-finding mission go into the southern Cameroons to bring out the truth.
Thank you. In the remaining time that I may not have.
Yeah, no, you don't. Thank you, Mr. Chu. Yeah, so we're moving now to the block, and Monsieur Alexis Brunel Duceppe for 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. Frankly, your responses are very important and very pertinent. I don't have much time, so I may need to cut you off because I have several questions I'd like to ask you. The first, history has taught us that in the past, when you deal with this kind of conflict, women and children are often the primary victims. I'd like to hear you on this matter. We've heard about some of this in the media, but I think we have to raise awareness of the public to get more support. Perhaps Mr. Tembon first? Thank you very much for that question. It is indeed a pertinent question. Women and children suffer the most in this type of conflict. There are more than 1 million children who have not gone to school for 4 years now. It's a very sad situation. Some children have been burned in their homes by the military. When the military invade a village, and of course, people flee, and the women and children who cannot flee are burned alive in their homes. A few days ago, I know of a father and baby who was burned. We saw videos in the social media, and the father is holding the baby in his hands while burning. So there are other occasions when children have been shot and killed. And women, of course, have been attacked. So they are victims of the conflict. So amongst the civilian population, women and children are the hardest hit. The international community must intervene. Thank you. Mr. Foligno? Yes, I'd like to add 2 points. The first images we saw of the conflict in 2017, we saw the villages burning, and we saw a mother burn in her home. And since then, there have been many criminal acts targeting women and children. We have a brief of a jail guard who's also been a witness. We don't have all the facts. Then, of course, you have the displaced internally. There are many women and young girls among these. And you also have victims in the big cities. And some of the young women who have been displaced must live from prostitution in the cities. And this is why actions need to be taken, comprehensive actions and immediate ones, to do away with this dirty war. Ms. Gary? Professor Gary, go ahead, please.
Thank you for this really important question. A couple of points. First, I just want to echo my fellow witnesses that we do not have the facts sufficiently with regard to this question. And it is something we've come across in our clinic as we've been doing our detailed report. The reports and the fact-finding that have been done so far by international human rights groups have overlooked and not detailed sufficiently the harm done to women and children. And so we've made a point of specifically doing in-depth interviews with refugees on this question. One thing that is becoming of increasing concern is child soldiers and forcible recruitment of children to join in and be part of the conflict, and concerns that this might become another Sierra Leone type situation. And so I would just flag that for you. In our in-depth interviews and our anecdotal evidence with women, we've heard about rape and sexual violence being used as weapons of war in the conflict. And a fact-finding inquiry and commission specifically on the treatment of these two groups in the population is critically in need. I can't emphasize that enough.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Earlier, Mr. Tembon, in his statement on Rwanda, and now we've just heard about Sierra Leone. So these are examples, and it shows that those countries neighboring Cameroon, what has their conduct been in regard to the conflict in the Cameroon? The neighboring countries, Nigeria, for instance, these countries have been leaders. So Nigeria supports Cameroon. They are a partner, of course, in their fight against Boko Haram. But then you have Chad, Central Africa, that has its own products. Chad depends on Cameroon. So because of the pipelines. And then there's Gabon. But all of these neighboring countries are, of course, influenced by France. France has a position of indifference, or it supports. Well, they hide behind non-interference. And what about the African Union in all this? Well, it hasn't pronounced itself. I myself have tried to attend the meetings. They've refused to meet with us. I think they're waiting for a direction from France. It's a club of presidents, and they're protecting each other. If I might clarify regarding the African Union, because they do function on the basis of solidarity. So sub-regionally, the countries must become involved. Then sub-regionally, there can be calls on the African Union. Cameroon is not in the sub-region of the West. It's in the central region. So the members of Central Africa are not as open because none of these countries has an Anglophone minority. So none of these countries are particularly sensitive to the issues unfolding in Cameroon.
Just before members, we move into our second round of questions. Got an update on the e-vote, and it looks like it's going to be around 7:30 or so. Just so you're aware. So we're going to move into our second round. As soon as we hear, we'll suspend.
Chair, I think I didn't get my chance on the first round.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Ms. McPherson, I apologize. But just going to, we'll bring you in right now, Ms. McPherson. And just for those, yeah. So as soon as we, it looks like the e-vote's going to happen closer to around 7:30-ish now. And Ms. McPherson for 7 minutes in the first round to conclude our first round. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just making sure I'm actually going to get my time, because it was very interesting to listen.
Me on my toes. Yes.
It was very interesting to listen to the witnesses. Thank you very much for being here and sharing this information with us. Of course, it's very horrifying to hear, and I'm deeply concerned of the information that you've brought to us today. In particular, I'm quite concerned when we hear things like genocide, when we hear impending genocide, when we hear things like a slow Rwanda. So we know that the media often plays a really important role in these kinds of conflicts, these kinds of human rights abuses. So I would really like some information on how the media is playing a role in this particular conflict. Maybe if I could start with you, Professor Gary.
Thank you. I'm actually going to defer to the other two witnesses. I don't feel sufficiently authoritative on that question. Thank you.
Dr. Fumunyu, I'm sorry, yes. I'm sure that was incorrectly pronounced.
No, that's fine, honorable member. It's unfortunate that the media, the international media, doesn't have as much access, and the local media, the national media, sometimes has felt constrained in its ability to go into the conflict zones and to report adequately and honestly on the impact of this conflict. Because media relations in Cameroon are also deplorable, and there are a whole host of journalists in prison. I mean, that could be the subject of a separate hearing. And so the space for media reporting is very restrained in Cameroon. Even the space for international human rights organizations is probably non-existent. That explains why organizations have got to rely on other sources to be able to obtain information. And I think a fact-finding mission would also open up the space for media to be able to go in and do adequate reporting on the current crisis.
Thank you. Mr. Tembon.
Yeah, I think according to the Community to Protect Journalists, Cameroon is one of the worst places for journalists in sub-Saharan Africa. Many journalists have been killed. Some are in prison. It's been a very, very difficult time for journalists. International media outlets have not really covered Cameroon that well, what the conflict that well. BBC has done some work reporting some massacres, reporting some issues that are going on and interviewing people. But what the work that has really been done well has been done by human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and even right there in Canada, there is the University of Toronto has a project, the database project of the University of Toronto that is collecting data on the atrocities. So some of that information will be found right there. And there are many other organizations that are also collecting data about what's going on. Oxford University has a project that has been studying the conflict, the root causes, and also collecting data. So those have helped. But as far as the media, the international media, or even local media, it's been very difficult because of the violence. It's difficult to actually go in there. The government soldiers or even the other fighters on the ground don't let you easily on the ground to cover what's going on.
So the local media, though, just to be clear, the local media is not stirring up, is not making the conflict worse. It is not inflaming the conflict from your perspective.
Or they were. In the beginning, it wasn't easy because you have the media, the Southern Cameroon journalists who want to report what's going on. They are silenced. but you have the public media that is being used.
Okay.
Yeah, it's being used to stir problems, a lot of hate speech, even through the media, not just social media, but also the media. We've gathered a lot of that information that's been used by the government media, or media houses that support the government against what's going on.
And social media is part of that as well. I think I overheard you say. I heard you say.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, and I guess when we look at this, and you talk about the international media not covering this, that it is not getting this conflict is not getting the international attention it needs from the multilateral institutions that we work with, bilateral relationships. Why do you think that is? I mean, why are we not seeing the United Nations act? Why is this such a slow moving ship at the moment, I guess? And has there been any change? I guess I'll add a question onto that. Any change now that we have a new administration in the US that seems much more interested in playing a meaningful role internationally? Have we seen a change at all yet?
Okay, I think I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've been troubled by the relationship between the Western governments and Cameroon. Mm-hmm. Because Cameroon, each time we talk, especially with the U.S. leadership, they say, "Oh, Cameroon is a partner," even though they are carrying out horrific abuses. They see them as a partner because of the interest of these different Western governments in Cameroon. So they look away when atrocity is committed. When I look at people like Mugabe, I don't think Mugabe did a tenth of what Mr. Biya has done. But Mr. Biya goes away with what's going on. The other issue is Mr. Biya and his government hired Western lobbies in DC. We, in our advocacy work, we had to fight against those lobby firms that deal with the media, lobby firms that deal with people in politics. And so it's not an easy, it's like struggling to go through a concrete wall. So I'm happy that we are getting this access now to be able to share with parliaments and with other politicians and getting some inroads. But it's not been easy because of French interest in the region, and also just because of the fight against Boko Haram. It clouded issues because Cameroon is one of the countries involved in the fight against Boko Haram in the Sahel. And that makes it difficult for the Western governments that are involved. They are in a very difficult position. How do they fight against this crime that's going on and also have Cameroon as a partner against Boko Haram?
Thank you. And if
Thank
either
you,
of the
Ms.
other,
Pearson.
I'm out of time.
That's your time for now. Yes, we're moving into the second round, and but at one point the vote will come up. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to divide the time up to about 2.5 minutes for each of the parties. We're starting with Ms. Ikra Khalid from the Liberal Party for 2.5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. I just want to pick up on some of the recommendations that the witnesses have made. There are a lot of similarities, and a lot of the things that you're asking for are very similar. Just one thing I want to ask Professor Gary, and then I'll maybe ask Dr. Fromenyo to also comment on it. Now, Professor, you had, in one of your recommendations, asked for a fact-finding commission. And Dr. Fromenyo had said that military has been used to resolve political differences, etc. Now, how would you describe, or how do you think it would be best to develop or to get access for that fact-finding commission? Would the current government be able to, or would they find it desirable to do so? So I'll start with you, Professor, and then I'll ask Dr. Fromenyo to also comment.
Thank you for that question. It's a very important one. I think that establishing a fact-finding mission or commission of inquiry obviously has to be done through multilateral fora, either through the United Nations or through the African Union, and in coordination with states that can apply pressure on the current government to allow for access to the impacted regions in particular, and also obviously for there to be ensured security for those investigators in the process. Without a multilateral sort of independent commission, I don't think it would be possible, as you note, given the instability in the regions, and given the current state of denial, frankly, by the current government with regard to what's going on.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fomigno?
Yes, I'll just echo that and add that in previous atrocities that have been committed in countries such as Myanmar, and we saw that with the Rohingya massacres or genocide, that the United Nations Human Rights Commission was instrumental in that regard. And I think if Canada begins to take the lead with some of its partners, it can galvanize the amount of international attention that's required to then get the United Nations Human Rights Commission to step forward and take responsibility to conduct such a high-level fact-finding mission.
Thank you. I think that concludes my time. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we're moving to Mr. Scott Reid for 2.5, 3 minutes. Scott, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are comparisons being made to Rwanda, which strikes me as perhaps not being fully accurate. One of the characteristics of Rwanda, it seems to me, was you had two conflicting groups within a country that was seen as being essentially geographically indissoluble. And so there was a battle in that context. In the case of what's going on in Cameroon, there's an area, southern Cameroon, which has declared itself, or at least some participants there have declared it to be an independent Republic of Ambazonia. And so the obvious question arises of how one deals with that question. Is there a realistic prospect of convincing the people who have tried to declare independence that they should be rejoined to and be satisfied with being a part of Cameroon as long as certain things are guaranteed for them? And alternatively, is it the case that the Cameroon government could ever be reconciled with this area becoming independent? You have to have one side concede to the other side winning it on this issue. I'm not sure which side it should be, or else you can never actually come to a resolution, just to an unending conflict. So I'm not sure to throw that to. Why don't we start with Professor Gary and then see who else can comment on it.
Thank you for that question. So in the clinic, we personally do not take a position with regard to political outcomes here, but and the solution with regard to the Northwest and Southwest regions. But what we do take a position on is that the parties, there needs to be pressure put on for an inclusive dialogue where all options are on the table and there is real discussion with regard to each of the opposing perspectives on the regions and what the outcome should be. I will pass it off to, I think, Dr. Fomigno and Mr. Tembone, who have more in detail to say about this.
Okay, great.
Honorable member, your question just underscores the need for a negotiated solution to this crisis, because between 1961, reunification 1961 and 2016, no one in what was the former British Southern Cameroons was killed because of being an Anglophone. Between 2016 and today, thousands of people have been killed. Villages have been burned. People are internally displaced. People are refugees. There is no way that this population is going to all of a sudden reconcile itself without a negotiated solution to the crisis. Secondly, there was an opinion poll that was conducted in the Anglophone communities about 2 years ago that showed that around 68% of the population wanted to go their separate ways. 2 years later, in 2020, a second opinion poll was conducted that showed that that number had risen to 86%, which means that the more that the government persists with a military solution to this crisis, the more it's going to antagonize the population to the point where reconciliation may become extremely difficult, if not impossible. And it's in everyone's interest that the parties be brought to the table right now to be able to sort out their differences and come out with a position that will stop the killings and create an environment in which people can coexist or live side by side or together.
Thank you. And now we'll move to Monsieur Alexis Brunel-Duceppe for, again, about 3 minutes.
Thank you. This will be my last opportunity, so I want to thank all three of you for appearing as witnesses. The work you're doing is very important. I'm going to go very quickly. All three of you talked about the school children who have been affected by this conflict. Mr. Fumunyo talked about 1.6 million who hadn't been to school in 4 years. Others say that the government has targeted schools and school children, yet others will say, well, it's the separatists who have targeted the schools and school children. Could you please enlighten us, Mr. Fumunyo? And sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Not at all. There has been confusion about that issue, but it's evolved over time. At the beginning, when the crisis began, people asked the kids not to go to school because the schools were at the center of the conflict. So people did not want the kids to go to school because they didn't want them to become a part of negotiation. That it's become a habit. So now for some 4 years, schools have been shut for the most part. We have seen cases where some schools wanted to reopen. And they have taken into account the needs in the different localities. So some schools have been reopening with their own school programs. There has been confusion. But in the rural areas where there have not been much presence and where schools are controlled by armed groups, schools are not open. That's some 80% of those areas. So how is the local population coping? How is it reacting to this state of affairs? The local population, of course, is living out the consequences. They're not able to negotiate with the armed groups, nor can they negotiate with the states. So they are taken hostage and experiencing the very negative consequences. And of course, many have transferred their children to neighboring areas of the Cameroon where children are trying to go to school. Thank you to all three of you, and also thanks to my colleagues who have asked excellent questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're moving to our final questioner, Ms. Heather McPherson, for about approximately 3 minutes before we're going to get to our e-question, our
Wonderful.
vote.
Our vote. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to all our witnesses for being here. I did want to ask a little bit on something that Dr. Fumunyo had mentioned about humanitarian aid, about development assistance, and how that might be able to be used as a tool. I guess what I wanted to get a little bit of sense is would you like to see Canada examine our development dollars that go to Cameroon? Would you like us to withhold those dollars until the Cameroonian government agrees to a ceasefire, agrees to negotiations? And I guess, in your opinion, would that influence the Cameroonian government? Would that be a tool that Canada could use effectively?
Certainly, it can be a tool, and I think it should be put on the table because the ultimate goal is to get the parties to stop killing each other and to come to a negotiation table. So if that can help as an incentive, then it should be utilized. The concerns that I have are born out of the experience that we've seen on the field, where, for example, material assistance that was given to the Cameroon military to fight Boko Haram in the extreme northern part of the country got diverted and transferred into the British Southern Cameroons, or the Southern Cameroons, the Northwest and the Southwest, to be engaged in that theater of operation. And so there's the sense that as long as the government continues to have resources, then it's not going to feel compelled to seek ways to get to the negotiating table and to bring all the parties to the table so that this can be sorted out through a negotiated solution. And I think whatever leverage Canada has should be put to use.
Okay, and perhaps does Mr. Tembon or Professor Gary any comment on that?
Yeah, I would like to say Professor Chris Roberts, who is of a political scientist at the Calgary University, has done some research on Canada's collaboration with Cameroon, and it's telling in terms of the values Canada promotes at home. In that dealing with Cameroon, it hasn't promoted the same values when it comes to the contracts, government support, and business with Cameroon. They have just overlooked the human rights issues, these atrocities, and have gone ahead to do business with Cameroon. And I think that's something Canada needs to look at. But I don't think that would deter Cameroon from continuing what they're doing. They are very determined. It would take more pressure and more serious work alongside other countries to stop these atrocities from happening.
So it could only be part of the solution.
Yes, that's correct.
Dr. Gary?
Yeah,
Professor
if I could just jump in on the point of coming alongside other countries doing the same. So the U.S. has been looking closely at its defense aid and withdrawing defense aid and military training under the Leahy laws here in the United States. They did so a couple of years ago. They also withdrew trade benefits. So I think these are important initiatives that, especially when done with other countries, can put pressure on the government.
Thank you so much. Thank you all very much for being here, and I'll pass it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson, and thank you to the witnesses on behalf of all committee members and all those that pulled this together. We thank you for your testimony. Thank you for the answers that you've provided us. From this hearing, what we will have is a statement will be published, and once that statement is published, that will be forwarded to all of you. So thank you very much on behalf of the committee. We really appreciate it. Members, we have not got the notice yet for the e-vote. I thought we would have had it by now, and it would have been a good transition. So, Madam Clerk, it looks like we're going to move into our I guess our second round, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if you could just suspend for a moment while I switch out the witnesses, that'd be great.
Sure, let's do that. Okay, members will suspend. Thank you. bottom of your screen, you'll see a globe. So if you need translation into English or French, please select the one that works best for you. Okay, so on that, thank you very much to everybody. And I am going to, I'm just not going to name you all, I'm just going to start off with Mr. Tekle from the Association of Tigrayo Communities in Canada. Mr. Tekle for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, honorable members of the House of Commons, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tesfaye Tekle from Association of Tigrayan Communities in Canada. It's an honor and privilege to testify in front of you regarding the man-made humanitarian crisis in Tigray. Thank you for the opportunity. As you might be aware, there is currently a brutal civil war and genocide unfolding in Ethiopia's Tigray region under complete darkness. On November the 3rd, 2020, the unelected federal government of Ethiopia, led by Mr. Abiy Ahmed, in coordination with Eritrean forces and Amhara regional state forces, attacked the people of Tigray and its government that was re-elected on September 9, 2020. In this war, the United Arab Emirates also participated by providing drone air power, and Somalia reportedly sent 3,000 troops. A sovereign state inviting and allowing multiple foreign countries to attack its own citizens using all kinds of lethal weapons is unheard of. The regime framed this treasonous act as, quote, law enforcement operation, which is ironic given the fact that it is an unelected and therefore an unlawful regime. For the last 3 months of the war, over 52,000 civilians have been murdered, according to Washington Post report, who cited 3 opposition parties in Tigray. Human Rights Watch report concludes that Abiy Ahmed soldiers bombed civilians to death and destroyed schools, hospitals, and markets in Tigray. Mass executions are very common. There are cases of up to 750 people massacred by Eritrean and Ethiopian forces in one day in Aksum at a church. So far, Eritrean and Ethiopian regimes have rebuffed all calls from the EU, European Union, and the US government for an immediate withdrawal of foreign troops and cessation of hostilities. An unprecedented level of humanitarian crisis is happening in Tigray. As if the bombs and bullets are not enough, Abiy Ahmed is weaponizing hunger to exterminate Tigrayans, just like his role model, Colonel Mengistu, did in 1984 and 85, to kill close to 1 million Tigrayans. Despite repeated calls for government and aid by government and aid agencies to allow access to humanitarian aid, the regime has been putting all sorts of hindrances to make sure Tigrayans die in mass. According to the Ethiopian Red Cross Society, 80% of Tigray is cut off from aid, and tens of thousands could die within months. Over 60,000 have fled to Sudan, 2.3 million internally displaced. UNHCR head Filippo Grandi described the situation as extremely grave. Rape has become rampant, that in many places, it's not whether women are raped, but it's a question of how many times. Gang rape has become commonplace, with instance of 17 Eritrean soldiers raping 1 woman in Adigrat. Over 700 women are raped in 1 month in the regional capital alone. There are also reports of individuals allegedly forced to rape members of their own family under threat of imminent violence, according to UN Special Representative Pramila Patten. According to Reuters, there are reports of women being ordered to choose between being raped or shot dead. As the facts on the ground could not be hidden anymore, the Ethiopian Minister of Women finally admitted horrible rape crimes are happening in Tigray. To make matters worse, victimized women and children could not get the medical help they desperately needed because healthcare facilities were looted and destroyed mostly by Eritrean invaders. According to a report by Doctors Without Borders, 80 to 90% of healthcare centers they visited were not functional. Tigray is cut from internet and telecom services just so outside world won't know about the atrocities. Similarly, international media are blocked from Tigray. And if you are a domestic journalist reporting on human rights abuses, you risk being assassinated. That's what exactly happened to Mr. Daoud Kabede of Tigray TV, who was shot dead along with his lawyer. Banks are closed and bank accounts of Tigrayans frozen so that they won't be able to withdraw money to buy food and necessities.
Thank you, Mr. Tekle, and you'll get a more chance during question time to be able to elaborate on what you've been saying. So we're moving to from the Balderas, North America, Mr. Alamu for 5 minutes, please.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Fitsum Alamu. I greatly appreciate this historic opportunity to address this honorable house. My name is Fitsum Alamu. I'm a lawyer, a U.S. citizen residing in Virginia. And from the outset, on behalf of Ethiopians, I would like to appreciate this opportunity also to express
I think Mr. Alamu frozen for everybody?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we're going to have Mr. Alamu work through those details. We may have to move right now to Ms. Gebrekiristos. I apologize for my mispronunciation of your name. But if you can also, being from the same organization, if you can also speak, if you could speak for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Honorable Representative of the Canadian Parliament, I wish to thank you for your current interest in Ethiopia and thank you for the enormous support you have given Ethiopia over years. I will begin with the story of the arrest of our party leader, Mr. Iskander Nega, in July of last year. Iskander started his day early as usual. He was concerned with news of the Hajalu Hundessa assassination the night before. By the end of the day, he decided to write a press release condemning violence in Ethiopia and the killing of this singer. The next day, after handing the letter to the printed, he went to his office. In what seems to be like less than half an hour, armed soldier had arrived to arrest Iskander without any warranted or explanation. The armed soldier forced him out of the office and threw him in a vehicle, wherein outside neighbors and passbys watched as he was beaten and held away. Another party leader, Sentayo Chakol, was arrested on his way home later that day. The government news outlet later announced that Iskander and his colleague has been arrested for inciting violence in Addis Ababa. Iskander is a recipient of numerous international honor and awards. So this is the whole story. It is clear to me that the government arrested Iskander for the following few reasons. The silence, the violence of the abused and oppressed, to silence the violence of the national heritage and undermine our values, to stop Iskander from openly participating in the upcoming election and to weaken his party, to create an atmosphere of fear and discourage participation in the election and discourage political activism and leadership, to stop him from being a voice from Addis Ababa. Having said this, I ask Canadian Parliament to reject a politically motivated charge against Iskander Nega and his colleagues. As per my information from Addis Ababa, while his subordinates visit him in person and ask that tell my story and urge that international community to condemn ongoing genocide, and displacement in Ethiopia. He further asked that we all work in condemning any politically motivated arrested of either himself or his colleague. Dear Honorable Canadian Parliament representative, beside Iskandar's arrest, Balderas for the True Democracy Party is under political repression in Ethiopia. Just to cite a recent politically motivated incident, our party has asked to hold a peaceful public demonstration to condemn ethnic violence and genocide in Ethiopia, to condemn border conflict between Ethiopia and Sudan, to condemn inequality of ethnic group in Addis Ababa, and to condemn politically motivated arrest of Iskandar and his colleague. However, the city government of Addis Ababa prohibits the demonstration. 2 days later, there was a huge demonstration across Oromo region to show support for Abiy Ahmed. Balderas has no right to hold any demonstration, but the ruling party has every right to do all. And it's not the first time to do this. It happens so many times. Dear Honorable Canadian Parliament representative, why these political leaders detained? Why they shouldn't release? Why this is important? What is the importance of political instability in Ethiopia on the international countries? Balderas political leaders are unjustly imprisoned for defending and promoting fundamental freedom and equality for all. The government wants to keep them in prison for an extended period to hold election without them. As evidence of proof during the court process the past 7 months, the government has repeatedly aimed.
Thank you, Ms. Gebrekistoos. Thank you very much. You'll have an opportunity also to expand during question time. Members, another question has been called an e-vote. If members, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Maybe we are able to do that. I've voted already. If members can also do that, and we'll ask Mr. Hussein now to come in for 5 minutes, please, sir.
Good evening, Honorable House of Commons. And it is a pleasure to talk to you about the Ethiopian crisis in Tigray region from Sudan, where I am working as a program director with CARE. I will be focusing.
I do apologize. I think there's problems with the interpretation. This is a very, very sensitive matter. I don't mind everything switching to English if necessary, but perhaps we could do a last try.
I will be focusing on the humanitarian need of more than 6.
So just so I understand, Monsieur Brunel Duceppe, is it, so you're not getting the interpretation?
Oui, exactement, mais comme...
As I tried to say, this is a very delicate topic. I know the interpreters are having difficulty interpreting Mr. Hussein. If the interpretation is not possible, I will try to follow without the interpretation. Perhaps we can do one last try.
Under the Official Languages Act, that will not be possible to do that. So unfortunately, we will not be able to hear from.
I understand, but would it be possible then to make an effort? Mr. Hussein has made such an effort to appear. It is so important that we be able to listen to him. If we cannot interpret Mr. Hussein this evening, he has so many important things to say. I would accept to go ahead just tonight. I would ask my colleagues if it be possible to agree.
Ask Madam Clerk if you can just, I know that you know the Officials Act, the Official Languages Act better than most, so if you can explain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will leave it in the subcommittee's hands. It's not recommended that we would go forward without interpretation at this point because of the equal accessibility for all Canadians right now.
As an alternative, Mr. Chair, while we're working on solving the problem, if it takes us a couple of minutes, we could just add that on to the end of the meeting as a way of extending it. That could also be done with unanimous consent of the committee, and it would allow us to operate in both languages as is appropriate.
Let's. I think we may have some extra time to work this out with. We've got Mr. Alemu back, and if you can, maybe he can finish his statement, and then we'll see how we can, clerk, we could fix Mr. Hussein's communications. Okay, Mr. Alemu, if you can continue. Yeah, unmute, please, sir. Thank you.
I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm here to tell you about what's going on in Ethiopia, not only in one province, but the whole region of Ethiopia. What we have witnessed is a flagrant violation of human rights, genocidal acts, and a conflict. As you may know, Ethiopia has been governed by EPRDF for almost 30 years. 3 years ago, Abiy Ahmed was elected to be the prime minister and the chairman of the EPRDF. Now, the EPRDF has changed its name to Prosperity Party. But at the time of the transition, TPLF, which was the dominant party governing the country, did not join the PP. Abiy Ahmed was elected to be a reformer. He has freed a lot of political prisoners, allowed some free media, named a new chief justice and a new chairman of the election board, and also a new director for human rights. However, Abiy Ahmed failed to change the constitution, which is the root cause of human rights situation in Ethiopia, a cause for genocidal acts in Ethiopia. And he filled courts and executive offices with friends and sympathizers. And also his regime continued the repression of the previous EPRDF regime, meaning there are still political prisoners or political party leaders in Ethiopia, including Iskander Nega. And there is still genocide going on in Ethiopia, less reported genocide. A lot of people and the media talks about the conflict in Tigray and the killing of innocent civilians in Tigray. But there is also another genocide, the Amhara genocide, that's going on in Benshangul Gumuz region and in Oromia region. All the regions are governed except for the Tigray region by the EPRDF coalition or the PP. But the government ignored these atrocities, or they don't even want this to be reported. One of the person who exposed genocidal acts was Iskander Nega, a leader of the Balderas party. He's been languishing in prison for the last 9 months. The preliminary hearing has been delayed many times, but he was denied bail. Iskander has been in jail. This is his 10th arrest now. As a good friend of Ethiopia, as a country which is generous, helping Ethiopia from the get-go, and as a country which cares deeply about human rights, that's why your committee have a hearing today. We ask you to send a mission to Ethiopia. We also ask you to consider, suspending some aid to Ethiopia and demand that all political prisoners, including Iskander Nega and others, be released. And we also ask you to put pressure on Ethiopian government to allow humanitarian access to Tigray region, and also to allow human rights investigators and free media to all over the country, not only Tigray, but all over the country, to investigate the genocidal acts being committed. in the past year and a half only, about 26 Amharas and Agos have been killed in 2 provinces, in 2 regions, in Benshangul region and also in Oromia region. So given this, we ask that you pressure the Ethiopian government to facilitate humanitarian and human rights access, and also demand that provide due process for people who are arrested, political prisoners who are arrested, and also safeguard their health and apply the best protocol, the best COVID-19 protocols. And also to, we also ask you to support, not to support the authoritarian regime, or the money that you give should not put for you know, to be committed to some activity that the government is used for. So in conclusion, I very much appreciate this opportunity, and I'm here to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And members, just to let you know about Mr. Hussein, we are looking if there is precedent because of the Official Languages Act to allow what we as a committee may want to decide, but we are looking to see if there is precedent. So at this time, we are going to have to hold off on Mr. Hussein unless the clerk has some more information for me.
So I don't have anything concrete right now, Mr. Chair, but if Mr. Hussein wants to move as close as possible to his microphone and try again, the interpreters will have another go.
Mr. Hussein, can you try that, please? Can you hear us, Mr. Hussein?
Yes, I will try to get close to the mic. Is it better now, please?
Yes, please try that way, as close as possible. Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to thank the House of Commons for this opportunity. My name is Tasfai Hussein. I am joining from Sudan, where I work as the program director with CARE International, which has funding from the government of Canada, and we are able to help people in need. So I will be focusing on the humanitarian need of the people that fled to Sudan and their prospect of returning back to where they come from. So currently, there are over 60,000 refugees in the East Sudan that fled the Tigray, the conflict in Tigray, who are in a dire humanitarian need. As you might know, currently Sudan is going through a very rough economic crisis, and more than 25% of its population are in need of humanitarian assistance. Therefore, the government or the environment cannot support additional crises. However, we have over 60,000 Ethiopian refugees in the country, and there is urgent need for humanitarian assistance. And most of the refugees, they have seen so many atrocities when they fled from the war for their lives, and they have told me so many horrific stories. And initially when they came, they wanted to stay close to the border because they thought the conflict is going to be over in a very short period of time, and they wanted to go back and resume their lives. However, as time goes by, their prospect of going back has diminished significantly, and most of them are thinking, to stay much longer because the situation on the ground is not getting better for multiple reasons. There are reports of, presence of Eritrean troops on the ground, which I haven't confirmed or anything. And there are also tribal or ethnic issues. For example, for the refugees came from western part of Tigray, that part of the country is now claimed to be part of the Amhara region. Therefore, they are not sure if they can go back, because if Amharas are saying this is our land, will they be welcome? However, the crisis in Tigray or the killings in other parts of the country, it has been in the making for a very long time for people who paid attention to Ethiopia. We have a very polarized environment. Everyone seems to have his or her own narrative of the story, and there is no common narrative that is helping us to resolve our problems. If, for example, the crisis in Tigray, some people think, oh, it is just for Tigrays, not like for Ethiopians. So there is this, us versus them mentality almost everywhere. In Oromia region, people are killed because they are from a different tribe. Just 2 days ago, we have a opposition political leader killed in one of the towns in Oromia region because he holds a different opinion. So we have so many layers of problems that are led us to this crisis. And I'm not sure if there is an easy way out. Therefore, I request the government of Canada to work with the Ethiopian government and people in power and pressure them to resolve the problem as soon as possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hussein. And it looks like that worked out in terms of the interpreters being able to do their job and hear you. Members, we are going to add some time, as we all agreed to. I'm thinking, and I just want to see if you're all right with this, that we would go 5 minutes for each member in the first round, and then 3 minutes in the second round. If there's any, or are there any objections to that? Would that be okay with the members? Yeah. Okay. Great. So we're gonna start the first round with Ms. Jennifer O'Connell from the Liberals for 5 minutes. Jennifer.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today and sharing this with us. It's incredibly important because, in a lot of mainstream, certainly in Western media, we're not hearing about a lot of the situations, certainly hearing in Ethiopia in our previous panel as well in Cameroon. So to hear what's happening on the ground is incredibly important for us as legislators. So I want to just start on a point that was made about the involvement of the UAE and Somalia. We often hear that the tensions are from interethnic tensions and political rivals, opponents, and there are multiple ethnic groups. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is, it seems that in the last couple of years maybe, and certainly has heightened, and maybe that's through COVID and that distraction, but what has kind of been the flashpoint to heighten tensions, and then also the UAE and Somalia involvement, kind of what's in it for them, who are they backing, and what is kind of their role in the region? So I'll leave that question maybe if one or two of you can jump in, because I have a follow-up question after.
Shall I go ahead?
Sure, thanks.
Because I brought it up.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the main architects of the conflict are the Ethiopian government, Abiy Ahmed, and the Eritrean government, who for some reason have their own agenda, that's to attack the Tigray regional leaders. Abiy Ahmed has he has an ambition to be a one-man dictatorship, and Eritrea has some kind of grudge against the Tigrayan leadership. So both of them have what they call a common enemy, which they can attack, which they did attack. And in the meantime, UAE is a good friend of Eritrea. And there is this regional alliance. There is the broader regional interest that UAE is involved. Even some say America's interest, previous Trump administration has an interest in that. The issue is very complicated to elaborate it here, but we should zoom in the two architects of this war. That's the Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea and Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia. Both of them have also like their own interest in their respective countries. Abiy Ahmed wants to be a one-man dictatorship, no democracy, no election. The same, his role model is the Eritrean dictator who has been in power for the last 30 years with no election, with no nothing. So both of them are aligned against the Tigray leadership, who apparently held election in September, while Abiy Ahmed refused to do federal election. So actually, in March of 2020, when Abiy Ahmed postponed election indefinitely, with COVID being taken as an excuse. Actually, Ethiopia had only very few cases of COVID back then, no deaths at all, I think less than 10. But the regime indefinitely postponed election. And TPLF, which is the regional leader of Tigray party, said, no, we won't postpone elections. At least we will do our own provincial elections. The federal election, it's beyond our capacity. But the provincial elections we will do. Then Abiy Ahmed threatened in March of 2020, if you go ahead with the election, I will bombard you. This is a statement he made on public TV. Our army is ready to attack you.
Thank you. Sorry, I won't have time for my second question, but it's important for Canada to understand that background, because if there's any humanitarian aid, we need to understand the role and the players, et cetera. In future questions, if there's a way to bring up the atrocities and the rapes that were spoken about in terms of the humanitarian support that a government like Canada can, if you can weave that into an answer somewhere in someone else's questions if they bring it up. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cano. Now we're moving to the Conservatives and Mr. Scott Reid for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pursue the Eritrean involvement for a bit longer. If there's one thing that Eritreans have traditionally felt strongly about, it's that Ethiopia is the great threat to their security. I was in Eritrea a few years ago and was struck that in a country that's very, very diverse, this was the one thing that united everybody, was their fear of Ethiopia. But now it appears that some kind of military alliance has been forged, and I'm just trying to sort out why this would happen from the Eritrean point of view. What do they see? What's the advantage to them in strengthening Ethiopia's hold over Tigray? I would have thought they would want the opposite. I'm not sure who I should go to for an answer on that question, but it's something that mystifies me.
May I?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I think the Eritrean government at this time had interest. The Eritrean government is an ally of Ethiopia. I think I'm not a fan of Isaias Afwerki, but I think he might have a change of mind about dealing with Ethiopia. Of course, he doesn't like TPLF leadership. He has a beef with TPLF leadership. But backtracking, what is the cause of this immediate war? I think the Canadian government and this House should know the immediate cause of this war is the attack of the Northern Command. I'm not the advocate for the Ethiopian government. I'm opposed to Abiy Ahmed, but in one thing that this House and everybody should know, that the immediate cause of this war is the attack of the Northern Command by the TPLF. TPLF has been in power in Ethiopia for 27 years. It was the leading force of Ethiopian government. But now, at that time, like 20 years ago, TPLF and EPLF has a fallout, and now they are enemies. So Isaias has interest to defeat TPLF, and maybe at this time Isaias has another way of thinking of the Horn. I don't know, but he himself is dictator. He might not care less about Ethiopia than Eritrea. So I think it's a complicated issue. Thank you.
I see another witness has his hand up to respond.
Yeah, it's just this narrative of attack on Northern Command is, I think it's misleading. The regime used it to mislead the international community and garner sympathy from the domestic population, but that's not true. You know, an entire army division with all its tanks, artilleries, being neutralized by Kalashnikov carrying militias and regional police forces. That's untrue. That's untrue. But regardless of who started the war, or regardless who took the preemptive action, there were things preceding to that day. The war didn't start on the 3rd of November. It actually started 3 years ago by the alliance of Isaias Afwerki and Abiy Ahmed. They have been planning this through the last 3 years, including involving United Arab Emirates and Somalia. And this doesn't happen overnight. This didn't happen on November 3. To create all this alliance doesn't take one day. It takes years of planning.
I had another question to ask if I could. The same witness, Mr. Tekle, and I know I've only got 30 seconds, so I'll make this brief. It doesn't appear to be the case that the Tigrayan leadership has been trying to seek independence. It seems, which is the normal source of conflicts in this region. It seems that they were trying to hold regional elections, and that in itself was found as being objectionable by the regime in Ethiopia. So is it the case they simply don't want to have elections occurring at all?
Exactly. That's what happened.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they, as I said, on TV, Abiy Ahmed made a public threat to Tigray. If you conduct election, my army is ready for you. He said, children will die, mothers will cry, and buildings will vanish. I can send you, honorable members of parliament, the link to the video. That's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Tekle. Now we're moving to the block, and the member for Saint-Jean, Lac Saint-Jean, Alexis Brunel-Duceppe for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses who are taking so much of their time to be with us today. Quite frankly, this is an extremely worrisome situation. I've listened to you carefully. Some might say, well, this faction is responsible, this other faction is responsible. The government will have one version. You speak to others elsewhere, they will have a different version. But what we do have is a real situation where people are suffering in Tigray. Atrocities are being committed. First and foremost, I know our subcommittee conducts inquiries, and we know that women and children are often the first victims in such situations. Christina, we have not heard from you yet. Do you have comments to make in this regard?
Madam Christina.
She may be frozen.
Ms. Christina?
Unmute, Christina.
Yeah, it was in French. I was not able to understand. I'm sorry.
Est-ce que vous allez pas monter?
I hope you don't take any time away from me. should I repeat my question? So,
you have your headset, the interpretation on the globe at the bottom of your screen where you've put on interpretation English or French?
Yes, I put English.
Okay, and you're not receiving the interpretation?
No, I didn't.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chu?
I think to be fair to Alexis, I think if he doesn't mind asking the question in English, that would probably be the most efficient for the witness and also for the proceeding of this committee.
It's up to Mr. Brunel Duceppe. I will add some time, Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
I've understood that the interpretation has not worked, but I will only do it in English if it's a fact that the interpretation is not going through. If you're confirming that, Mr. Chair, that's fine. I know it's a very sensitive issue.
No, this is the first I've heard of it. So, clerk, if you can let us know, is the interpretation not working for Christina?
The interpretation is working fine. Christina, have you clicked on the globe icon on the bottom and selected English?
Yes, it says English.
Alors, est-ce que tu peux entendre?
Can you hear the voice of the interpreter? This is the voice of the interpreter. Can you hear the interpreter's voice?
To go, Monsieur Brunel Duceppe, en français.
So let me begin my question. Thank you, Chair. What I was saying is that very unfortunately, we in our subcommittee conduct these inquiries, and we often hear that women and girls are the first victims in these conflicts, such as the conflict in Tigray. Ms. Christina, could you expand on what is unfolding with women and girls at this time in Tigray?
I'm concerning about Balderas for the True Democracy. I don't have too much of Tigrayan religion, what happened is there, but I believe and I know that all over Ethiopia, there is a woman, there is men, there is a lot of old ladies are dying everywhere, and there is injustice and there is no freedom. It's been 3 years. Mr. Abiy Ahmed was taking an award for peace, and he was promised for peace and freedom, but what we see is everybody's dying and nobody have the right to say a word. Even political parties are arrested and they're not able to do anything. That's what I know.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. Christina. Perhaps Mr. Hussein could address this issue. I know he works with refugees. I expect he has heard testimonials.
Yes, I said we have over 60,000 refugees in Sudan that fled from Tigray conflict, and most of them are women and girls and children. They're disproportionately affected by the crisis. Either they lost in their, husbands or brothers or fathers, and they're extremely economically fragile at the moment. And there is also a report of ongoing rape and killings within Tigray region. But that is not only for Tigray region, it is across Ethiopia in many parts, even if today our focus is the Tigray crisis. Just to give you one example, I met with a woman who lost her husband to the conflict with 3 children, and he was killed. He was not on anybody's side. He was just killed by the crossfire. And she's here in Sudan with her children, and she doesn't have any hope for the future. I met another woman who was supposed to have a cancer treatment in Adigrat Hospital, but she ran to Sudan because of the conflict. And when she reported to the clinic in the refugee camp, she was given anti-pain only for her serious medical care.
Thank you. Now we're now moving to Ms. McPherson for 5 minutes, and this will end our first round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. I have spent a great deal of time in Ethiopia, and it's very, very sad for me to actually hear some of this testimony. I actually realized that the photo or the painting behind me is one that I purchased in Addis, and so I take all of this to my heart very much. One of the things that I would like to ask about is Canada's role in helping with this conflict. And I know that Canada, and particularly with our overseas development assistance, with our humanitarian aid, that Ethiopia is an enormous recipient of our aid, that up to almost $200 million goes to Ethiopia from the Canadian government. It seems to me that at this point in time, that aid is being weaponized. From what I'm hearing from you, that's very clearly happening, that food is being withheld, humanitarian aid is being withheld. So I'd like to start with my fellow Albertan, Mr. Tickley, to talk a little bit about the impacts of Canadian aid and what you would like to see the Canadian government do, and how you would like to see the Canadian government use that as a tool.
Well, thank you, honorable member of the parliament. Well, the regime, if it gets money, it's using it on war. It's not the last 3 years we haven't seen that much development in Ethiopia. It's just building the military, buying machine guns, etc., etc. Now, to the extent even paying the Eritrean regime a service fee for the crime or for the support it's giving the Addis Ababa regime for its involvement, actually.
That's not the humanitarian dollars that is being spent on that, is it? From your perspective?
Well, it's going to the same coffers, to the same. So we don't know if the regime is spending the money responsibly. I don't know what procedures there are in place to make sure Canadian money dollars are spent appropriately. But I assume the regime has all the leverage to divert the money to whatever it wants to divert, you know. So I would say there should be like a clear accountability of aid money, humanitarian aid. There should be a way it can reach out to the actual recipients, not through the government. If it goes through the government, it will get directed to other purposes, which means forward. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And maybe Mr. Hussein, as somebody from the CSO community, from the humanitarian community, you could also comment on that.
Absolutely. I mean, what I would like to request the Canadian government is, I mean, not to withhold the humanitarian assistance either to Ethiopian people or, you know, the Sudan government that is hosting more than 60,000 refugees. However, there is a need to work with the government, I mean, to address these critical issues. It is not only the Tigray crisis. I mean, if today we are in Tigray for this crisis, I'm sure tomorrow something else will happen. Of course, there is an ongoing crisis in Benishangul Gumuz, which is not reported as much. So we have very, very critical structural problem within the country. So tomorrow we'll have another crisis unless the government of Canada and others work with the government to address these critical issues. You know, we don't have a common narrative as a country. So everything is very polarized. So everybody has his own narrative of the situation. I mean, for some people, the Tigray conflict started when the war broke out. No, it was in the making for years. It is not related because of Abiy Ahmed is coming to power. We have ethnic-based country. As if you are from Tigray, you don't feel safe in Amhara region or other regions, vice versa. So it is a very polarized country that needs huge help in terms of addressing these conflicting narratives everywhere.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. We're moving to our second round now, members and witnesses. So we've got to limit our time. We're at 2.5 minutes per questioner. So 2.5 minutes, and we'll try to hold to that pretty strictly. Our first questioner is Anita Vandenbeld from the Liberals for 2.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today to explain this to us. I remember it was only a few years ago, I believe in 2018, at a Democracy Global Conference where Ethiopia was held up as the great promising hope. And clearly the international community missed something, missed certain warning signs. And I'm wondering if you could, first of all, how is it that it went from this tremendous hope for democracy to this deplorable situation that we're hearing about today? And what is it that the international community can do better in terms of being able to be forewarned? I hear what Mr. Hussein is saying, that this was in the making for many, many years, if not decades. How do we forewarn and prevent these kinds of things from happening, particularly when the international community is looking at it as a promising area?
May I?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So Ethiopian budget, comes from aid and loan from Canada, U.S., and the European Union. I think these donor countries, they can pressure the government to reform, to make everybody safe, like amend the constitution, respect human rights, and solve political problems. Through a talk, through a roundtable discussion, not through using weapons. And Abiy Ahmed, he cares more about his image. He cares more about he being a peaceful man. He being the Gorbachev of Ethiopia, and he cares more about his image. So I think, if this donor countries pressure him to, do reform. If not, then we're not giving you money. Stop the war. If not, then we don't give you money. This kind of talk, I think, would have a big impact. Thank you.
We're going to have to move to our next question. Thank you very much. So we've got from the Conservatives, Mr. Kenny Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question actually has already been asked by a member from Edmonton Strathcona, which is actually great. But I'd like to expand on that a little bit, Mr. Takley. So we heard about the weaponization of agriculture and product. To what extent is so you mentioned about the government side of it, but what about the NGO? Is the foreign NGO aid in the area, in the region, helping or not helping?
Okay, thank you. Well, one of the biggest problem is the government not allowing access to humanitarian aid, whether it's food or medicine or anything else. And repeated calls have been made by UN agencies, the Norwegian Red Cross, for example, and the government doesn't say no, but it puts a bureaucratic hurdles so that these NGOs won't be able to deliver the necessary aid to the people in need.
Thank you. My question actually presume there's an assumption there that the Tigrayans are not self-sufficient in their agriculture and their food production. Is that true? Or can you outline us what the agriculture situation in Tigray area, please?
Well, I mean, it's a subsistence economy for the most part. It's agriculture based, like everywhere else in Ethiopia. But this year in particular was what they call a bumper year, meaning the rainy season was exceptionally good throughout Tigray. But there was a locust invasion. Actually, the war started in the midst of the worst locust invasion that Tigray has faced, and when the farmers were harvesting their crops. So that's what compounded to the problem.
Thank you. My last question is to Mr. Alamu. How is Canadians, expats with Ethiopians being influenced by the government there?
In 10 seconds, please.
Can you repeat the question again?
Mr. Chu,
it's probably not fair.
yeah, I don't think we have time. So I apologize.
Yeah, thank you.
But we're moving to Mr. Alexis Brunel-Duceppe for 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Tout d'abord, merci.
Thank you very much. This is the last time I'll have this opportunity to speak, so I'd like to thank the witnesses. We will be your voice piece here. So I would like to know what the rest of the Ethiopian population that is outside of Tigray, what is their thinking? Is there government propaganda? Perhaps Mr. Tickley, might you be able to comment on this?
Was the question directed towards me?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I lost part of the French speech because I didn't know how to choose the interpretation. Yeah.
No problem. I'm used to this happening because I'm the only Francophone MP on this subcommittee. Let me repeat my question. I wanted to know how the rest of the Ethiopian population, that is the population outside of Tigray, what is it thinking about this conflict? Did the rest of the population choose its side in the conflict? Do you have any comments about this?
Thank you very much. Well, about the rest of the population of the country, the thing is the government maintains media monopoly. So whatever narrative the government promotes, it gets currency in the rest of the population. So a majority of the Ethiopian population, I would say, are misled by government propaganda. There is nothing coming out from Tigray that kind of counteracts that narrative. So yeah, we didn't see people coming out and opposing the war, and that's very sad. Even clergy, priests, popes, they were supporting the war, and that's a very sad history, sad thing in our history. When religious people bless the war in Tigray, I don't know what country we are having.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Mr. Chairman, I don't think I've completed my 3 minutes. I think there was a technical glitch. I think my colleagues will agree with me that I was not given my 3 minutes.
20 seconds extra, Mr. Brunel-Duceppe. And on your other one, I did ask 90 seconds, so I do try to allow for...
I will have to listen to the recording, and I hope I didn't lose any time, because that would be unacceptable. The work of this committee is too important. It would be very disappointing that because of a problem with the delivery of the interpretation, I'd be penalized.
No, Mr. Brunel-Duceppe, you are correct, and I do try to allocate for that time wherever we have these technical difficulties or challenges with interpretation or the like. So I did add on your first and on this one. Okay, so we are going to move to Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly thank you again to all the witnesses. I will have the last opportunity to ask you questions. One of the things that I wanted to ask is if this week the government of Canada led a charge asking for all countries to step away from arbitrary detention, to oppose arbitrary detention, would it be worthwhile, and I'd like to hear from all four of you, to have the Canadian government withhold humanitarian aid, withhold bilateral aid until the Ethiopian government does agree to release political prisoners at this time? I'm just wondering if that would be something that you would see as useful. And maybe if I could, I would start again with Mr. Tikley.
I would say yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Funds
thank you.
should be withheld. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Alemu?
Humanitarian aid, no. But bilateral aid, yes. Because the bilateral aid will go to the government budget and we don't know where the money would go. But humanitarian aid will hurt the people, I think. And at this time, I don't really suggest that. Thank you.
Ms. Gebrakouristos?
Yes, thank you. I agree. I think it will change a lot.
Wonderful. And then finally, Mr. Hussein, last word for you, and then I know that that will be our time.
Withholding humanitarian aid, no. Actually, there is a need to increase it because people are starving, people are dying, people don't have access to medical services and so on. Bilateral aid, yes, I agree with Mr. Fitsum, that might put a pressure on the government.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Thank you to all of our witnesses. Thank you for your testimony and for your answers to the questions on the current situation that is transpiring in Ethiopia. And just to the witnesses, to let you know, our analysts have been capturing this information. A statement will be put together, and once published, that will also be distributed to all of you. So, on behalf of all the committee members, we just want to thank you very much for participating and for being part of this committee session. Thank you.
Would you give me a couple of minutes, please, Chair? We can release the witnesses.